Mephibosheth, a name that many may not recognize at first glance, carries one of the most moving and profound stories in the Bible. Son of Jonathan and grandson of Israel's first king, Saul, he was born into privilege, but his destiny was drastically altered. Crippled from childhood, forgotten and living on the fringes of society, Mephibosheth experienced a remarkable turnaround when he was welcomed with honor into Israel's royal court. His journey is far more than a tale of rags to riches or humiliation to exaltation. It is a story of grace, redemption, and loyalty that reflects the deepest values of divine mercy. This narrative, both tragic and inspiring, takes us on a journey of challenges and overcoming. From his childhood marked by a devastating accident to his time with King David, Mephibosheth teaches us valuable lessons about humility, faith, and the transformative power of kindness. Throughout his story, we not only witness the injustices he endured, but also his extraordinary response to adversity. Through David's loyalty to his friendship with Jonathan, we see how God uses human relationships to accomplish his greater purposes. Whether or not you are familiar with this biblical narrative, I invite you to delve into the details and nuances that may have been overlooked. Mephibosheth is more than a forgotten character. He is a living testament to how grace can transform even the most broken lives. Get ready to explore this impressive journey and uncover truths that continue to resonate today. Welcome to Daily Biblical History. Today we will explore an inspiring message to strengthen your faith and bring peace to your heart. Leave a like to support our channel and subscribe if you are not already subscribed, so you don't miss any of the motivational content we post here. Part 1. The Beginning of Tragedy. Mephibosheth was born into a context of glory, being the heir of Israel's royal lineage. His grandfather, King Saul, ruled the nation, and his father, Jonathan, was one of the most respected and loyal princes of his time. However, this prestigious heritage was soon interrupted by a devastating tragedy that would mark his life forever. At the age of 5, his life turned upside down when his grandfather, father, and uncles were killed in a battle against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. The news of the death of all the family leaders struck Saul's household like a fatal blow, plunging the survivors into despair. In this chaotic scenario, Mephibosheth's personal tragedy unfolded. While his nurse was fleeing with him to protect him from potential vengeance or persecution, a fateful accident occurred. She tripped and dropped the boy. This seemingly simple fall resulted in a severe injury that left him crippled in both feet for the rest of his life. For such a young child, the accident was more than a physical tragedy. It also marked the beginning of a long period of isolation, pain, and shame. Mephibosheth's disability became a symbol of his social and emotional downfall. In a society that valued strength, appearance, and physical ability, being crippled was not just a physical limitation, but also a barrier to social acceptance. To society's eyes, he fell from a prince to someone worthy only of pity and neglect. This episode marked the beginning of a journey filled with adversity, but also set the stage for a future full of lessons and redemption. Part 2. Life in Lodebar. After the accident that left him crippled, Mephibosheth was taken to Lodebar, a remote and obscure place that represented not only a geographic shift, but also a social and emotional decline. Lodebar, whose name can be translated as no pasture or no word, was a barren land devoid of resources. For many, Lodebar symbolized the end of the line, a place of forgetfulness and despair. For Mephibosheth, it was where he would spend years of his life far from the court and the dignity he had once enjoyed as a member of the royal family. Even in this hostile environment, Mephibosheth found refuge in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel. Machir played a crucial role in Mephibosheth's survival, offering him a safe place to live amidst adversity. Despite his fragile and dependent position, Mephibosheth demonstrated resilience by adapting to his new reality. While the biblical narrative does not provide many details about his life in Lodabar, it is evident that he faced significant challenges, both physical and emotional. However, Lodabar was not solely a place of sorrow. It was there that Mephibosheth built a family, which shows his capacity to find hope even in the most difficult circumstances. He learned to survive, endure, and build something meaningful despite all the limitations imposed by life. His time in Lodabar serves as a reminder that even in the darkest places, moments of light and hope can be found. This period was a phase of preparation, a time when he developed the inner strength necessary to face the challenges ahead. Part 3. David's Covenant. While Mephibosheth lived in Lodabar, far from the court and any hope of reclaiming his social status, King David in Jerusalem was overcome with nostalgia and a sense of responsibility. Years earlier, David had made a sacred covenant with Jonathan, Mephibosheth's father, pledging eternal loyalty to him. Jonathan, besides being the crown prince, was also David's closest friend, sharing a deep bond of trust, respect, and brotherly love. Now, firmly established as king, David felt it was time to honor this covenant and demonstrate God's kindness to Jonathan's descendants. David began his search by asking members of his court if there were any surviving descendants of Saul's house. It was then that Ziba, a former servant of Saul, came forward. Ziba informed David that there was indeed an heir to Saul's house, Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son who lived in Lodabar. This revelation stirred mixed emotions in David. On one hand, he was eager to fulfill his promise, but on the other hand, he knew that bringing someone from Saul's lineage to the court might raise political and social questions, especially given Saul's history as David's adversary. Despite these potential challenges, David chose to act with courage and grace. He ordered that Mephibosheth be brought immediately into his presence. This act was more than a demonstration of loyalty to Jonathan. It was an act of mercy and compassion. By seeking out Mephibosheth, David not only intended to honor his promise, but also to show that God's kindness transcends rivalries and political differences. It was a moment of reconciliation, restoration, and a reminder that divine grace can rescue even those forgotten at society's margins. Part 4. The Invitation to the Royal Table. When Mephibosheth was brought before David, it's difficult to imagine what was going through his mind. Coming from Lodabar, a place marked by isolation and scarcity, he now found himself in the royal palace, standing before the most powerful man in Israel. For someone who had spent years living in obscurity and bearing the stigma of his disability, this audience with the king might have seemed both an opportunity and a threat. After all, it was common for new kings to eliminate any surviving members of previous dynasties, especially from rival families like Saul's. Upon appearing before David, Mephibosheth fell to the ground, bowing in respect and submission. He referred to himself as a dead dog, a term reflecting not only his humility, but also the low expectations he held for his own life. However, David quickly reassured him, telling him he had no reason to fear. In a gesture of immense kindness, David announced that he would restore to Mephibosheth all the lands that had belonged to Saul, and even more astonishingly, invited him to eat at the king's table as one of his own sons. This invitation was more than a generous act. For Mephibosheth, sitting at the king's table signified being treated as an equal, someone worthy of honor and respect. In a society that valued physical strength and outward appearances, a crippled man was now welcomed as a member of the royal household. Additionally, the restoration of land and dignity represented a complete reversal of his circumstances. He was elevated from exile in Lodebar to a position of privilege in Israel's court. This moment encapsulates the central message of divine grace, the ability to radically and unexpectedly transform lives. Part 5. Ziba's betrayal. Mephibosheth's new life in David's court seemed to be a story of redemption, but the challenges were far from over. During Absalom's rebellion against his father, King David, the kingdom descended into chaos and uncertainty. It was during this tumultuous time that Ziba, Saul's former servant and now the steward of Mephibosheth's lands, seized an opportunity to advance his own position. Ziba approached David, bringing supplies for the king's army and delivering a grave accusation against Mephibosheth. He claimed that Mephibosheth had stayed in Jerusalem, hoping that Absalom's uprising would restore the kingdom to Saul's lineage. This accusation struck at the heart of David's trust in Mephibosheth. Overwhelmed by the pressures of war and unable to investigate further, David chose to believe Ziba's account. In response, he granted all of Mephibosheth's lands to Ziba. For Mephibosheth, this situation was devastating. He not only lost his lands but also had his loyalty to David questioned. Furthermore, he was betrayed by someone who was supposed to be a trustworthy steward of his estate. Ziba's actions are a reminder of human fragility and the ease with which people can manipulate situations for their benefit. Yet, Mephibosheth's true character would soon be revealed in his response to this injustice. Part 6. The Test of Integrity. After Absalom's rebellion was quelled and David returned to Jerusalem, Mephibosheth had the opportunity to present his side of the story. During David's time in exile, Mephibosheth had remained in Jerusalem, not by choice or disloyalty, but due to his physical disability, which made it impossible for him to flee. Despite his situation, Mephibosheth demonstrated his loyalty in a symbolic and profound way. He neglected his appearance for the entire duration of David's absence. He did not trim his beard, wash his clothes, or care for his feet, remaining in a state of mourning and solidarity with the king. When summoned before David, Mephibosheth humbly explained how he had been betrayed by Ziba, who left him in Jerusalem and took advantage of the situation to defame him. His unkempt appearance and sincere words proved that he had never wavered in his loyalty to David, even in adversity. For Mephibosheth, the priority was not his land or wealth, but the well-being of the king and the justice of God. Upon hearing Mephibosheth's account, David realized he had been deceived by Ziba. However, rather than fully reversing his earlier decision, David chose to divide the lands between Ziba and Mephibosheth. This resolution reflects David's leadership, balancing compassion with the practicalities of political stability. For Mephibosheth, the outcome was not a concern. He responded with extraordinary humility and gratitude, stating that Ziba could take everything as long as David was safe and at peace. Part 7. Mephibosheth's Renunciation. Mephibosheth's decision to relinquish his land and wealth was an act of generosity that exceeded the expectations of his time. Having already lost so much in life, His mobility, his status as a prince, and temporarily his reputation, he showed that he was not attached to material possessions. For Mephibosheth, the most important thing was his relationship with the king, symbolizing not just earthly authority, but divine grace. By giving up his land, Mephibosheth demonstrated a profound understanding of what truly matters in life. He recognized that material possessions are fleeting and that true wealth lies in loyalty, integrity, and a relationship with God. His attitude surprised everyone, including David, who saw in him a living example of humility and faith. This renunciation was not a sign of weakness, but of moral strength. Mephibosheth showed that true nobility is not in wealth or status, but in a heart willing to forgive and prioritize others above oneself. His choice to focus on the king's well-being rather than his inheritance echoed as a powerful testimony to spiritual values that transcend earthly circumstances. Part 8. The Lesson of Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth's story is not merely a historical account. It is an eternal lesson in character, integrity, and faith. Despite the adversities he faced, physical disability, isolation in Lodabar, false accusations by Ziba, and the loss of his possessions, he remained steadfast in his loyalty to David and his trust in God. Mephibosheth teaches us that true greatness does not lie in the absence of problems, but in how we choose to respond to them. His life reflects God's redemptive grace, which elevates the marginalized and forgotten to positions of honor and dignity. Even in his crippled and exiled state, he was brought to the king's table, a powerful symbol of inclusion and the intrinsic value that God assigns to every individual. Moreover, his decision to forgive Ziba and relinquish his lands reveals that forgiveness and generosity are expressions of true nobility. The story of Mephibosheth challenges us to evaluate our own lives. Amid our struggles, we are called to trust God, forgive those who wrong us, and value what truly matters. His example reminds us that material wealth and social status are transient, but character and faith hold eternal value. Mephibosheth inspires us to live with courage and humility, no matter the circumstances. He teaches us that even when we are overlooked or wronged, God sees us and has a plan to restore us. Through his story, we are reminded to trust in divine grace and to lead lives marked by fidelity and love for others. Part 9, the final invitation to reflection. The story of Mephibosheth is a rich tapestry of suffering, redemption, and grace. It begins with personal tragedy and unfolds into a journey of overcoming and restoration. Each chapter of his life reveals a different aspect of God's kindness and faithfulness, which transforms even the most desperate situations into opportunities to demonstrate his grace. As we reflect on this story, we are reminded that God does not see people as the world does. While society may value strength and appearance, God looks at the heart. Mephibosheth, despite his limitations and challenges, was chosen as an example of how God can use even the weakest among us to manifest his glory. His journey also challenges us to reassess our priorities. In a world that often values the accumulation of wealth and power, Mephibosheth shows us that true wealth lies in our communion with the King of Kings and our willingness to serve with humility. His story is a call to trust in God's providence, to cultivate a generous and forgiving heart, and to live lives of gratitude. May we carry the lessons of Mephibosheth with us, the courage to face adversity, the humility to let go of worldly possessions, and the faith to remain steadfast in every situation. His story reminds us that no matter our condition or past, we always have a reserved place at the King's table. Part 10. The Spiritual Legacy of Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth's story transcends its historical context. It is an invitation to reflect on deep questions of identity, value, and the transformative power of grace. From the moment he fell from his nurse's arms and became physically disabled, to the moment he was restored to the king's table, his life became a living testimony of how grace can transcend any human limitation. His journey mirrors the struggle we all face, the search for dignity and value amid life's challenges. Mephibosheth teaches us that our true identity is not defined by our limitations or the circumstances that restrict us, but by how we relate to the King of Kings. David's acceptance of Mephibosheth was not merely an act of compassion, it was a profound reminder that he was more than his disability or his story of loss. Sitting at the king's table symbolized honor, equality, and restoration, a reflection of God's view of every individual. Additionally, Mephibosheth's willingness to surrender his material possessions after Ziba's betrayal offers an invaluable lesson on spiritual priorities. He refused to let bitterness or a desire for vengeance consume him, choosing instead to focus on loyalty and humility. This act showed not only his trust in God, but also his understanding that his true treasure lay in his relationship with the king and his unshakable faith. Mephibosheth's story challenges us to practice forgiveness and generosity, even in the face of deep injustice. His decision to let Ziba keep the land as long as David was safe reflects a heart that prioritizes peace over conflict and grace over resentment. It reminds us that even in betrayal, we are called to embody God's character, slow to anger and rich in mercy. Finally, the life of Mephibosheth points us to the ultimate spiritual truth. We are all, in a sense, spiritually crippled and in need of the king's grace. Just as David invited Mephibosheth to his table, God invites us to his, not because of our merit, but because of his goodness and faithfulness. This story foreshadows the gospel, where Christ, the true King, restores our dignity and offers us a place of honor in his kingdom. Conclusion: the eternal message of Mephibosheth. The story of Mephibosheth is a powerful metaphor for the Christian life and God's relationship with humanity. Just as David extended grace to Mephibosheth, God invites us to receive his grace, regardless of our failures or limitations. The narrative is not merely about a man restored to earthly dignity, but also about God's power to transform lives, rewrite stories, and give us an eternal purpose. Every detail of this story, the initial tragedy, the isolation in Lodebar, the restoration in David's court, and the test of integrity in betrayal, testifies to how God works in our lives. He meets us in our lowest moments, calls us into his presence, and gives us a new identity as his children. May we be inspired by Mephibosheth's story to face our challenges with courage, faith, and humility. Let us learn to relinquish temporary things for eternal values and trust in God's goodness, even when life seems unfair. Above all, let us never forget that regardless of our condition or past, we always have a place reserved at the table of the King of Kings. Are you enjoying the message? Share this video with someone who needs to hear this motivational word today. And leave your comment. We want to know how this message impacted your life.